Welcome to AIR4VR Counselors. I'm Dr. Olivia. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're joined by Michael Beers. Michael is a comedian who lives with a disability and teaches self-efficacy to youth with disability through improv. Mike, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Olivia. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So the first question I have for you, just simply tell us what motivated you to become an advocate for youth with disabilities.
Yeah, fantastic. So I would say that it really started the summer after my senior year of high school. So it was very, I don't know if serendipitous is the right word, but I performed as a comedian the first time, May of my senior year, and then that July, I went to our state's youth leadership forum. So a lot of states, I believe, the last time I checked, I think there are 20 some odd states that have youth leadership forums, and I knew nothing about it other than it would look good on my resume, and it was something for young people with disabilities. And I think I share this with a lot of students I've worked with back then and even today. Like we're not necessarily prone to like rushing toward programs for people with disabilities when we're young.
Mm,
I certainly wasn't because somehow there's not a sense of place in that community.
mm,
Yeah. You're almost the polar opposite. You want to distance yourself from that label because somehow um, being a part of something that's specifically for people with disabilities made me feel more disabled or more isolated somehow
okay.
socially. So, and I think that's a lot. It's true for a lot of students with disabilities, apparent and non-apparent. But I went, and that week for me. So typically, you go and you stay at a college campus for a week, and hear all kinds of speakers about your goals and resources that you can connect with and things like that. But the two things I really got out of it were first off, when I walked through the door, I was very nervous and very scared because I hadn't spent that much time away from my family.
Yeah.
Um, and but I noticed right away that a lot of the staff had disabilities,
Mhm.
um, and throughout the week learned that even the staff that didn't have disabilities, I could see maybe dealing with disabilities that are more non-apparent, and that was way different for me. So every other program that I'd been a part of or been recommended to be a part of tended to be people without disabilities, that really wanted to help me out and have the best intentions, but
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like maybe they're in it more for them than they are
Mm,
for you.
yeah.
um so to have the staff be people that understood what it was like to have disability with you all the time at school, in relationships, and looking at your goals, that was huge for me. And then I think that was when I first started to understand the history and culture behind disability. So yeah, I knew I was in special education my entire school career, and I knew I had an IEP,
Mhm.
and I was annoyed by both of these things, but I had no context for how those things came to be, and more importantly, who the people were that fought those battles and died in some cases because so I could be annoyed by them.
Yeah.
Um, so hearing those stories really, made me open my eyes to because that's not something I ever got in public school, and in growing up. So yeah, I think those two things really inspired me to say, well, if I didn't get it, other students aren't getting it, and what part can I play in making sure that they get this at an earlier age, so um, they can go through that experience.
Okay. That's an incredible experience to have.
Mm.
So then how did you end up marrying your career as a comedian and your advocacy work with youth?
So it wasn't. It was a reluctant process. It was more of an arranged marriage. than anything I intended. So after I performed for the first time, and I was not a very outspoken person. In fact, the story on me for my first YLF was like, "Hey, is this kid nonverbal? Like, is that part of his?" I was like, "No, he can talk. He just doesn't do it."
Yeah.
Um, so really doing stand up for the first time was a shock for a lot of people around me. But the first time I got up on stage, and I was taller and louder than everybody else, and I heard somebody laugh at the thing I said. It was love at first laugh. I knew this had to be a part of my life in some form going forward, because I felt more like me than I've
Mm,
ever felt in my entire life. And something about a piece of our culture that I don't know that we talk about enough is that a big part of it is we're really good at trying to be other people.
mm,
Like my school career, up to probably getting out of high school, was much more about studying other people than it was about my subjects. So because I didn't feel like I fit in, I would look and say, okay, what do you wear? What do you talk about? If
mm.
I'm asked about this question, how do I respond
Yeah.
in order to try to fit in? So um, there's not really much time to say, well, who am I? Um, outside of trying to be other people. So stand up for me was really that confidence boost. And then when I found the YLF, an independent living center. I right my freshman year at college got a hold of me, and I started getting involved there, and that became my first job. My first outside of babysitting and mowing lawns. Occasionally, that was my first interview. That was my first hey, you have the job experience.
Mm,
And in the beginning, it really was about, well, here's a career path that can pay my bills, and it's something I enjoy, and it's something that's, I know I'm going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks.
mm,
Where stand up was either I wasn't getting paid, or it was a check every now and again. So it wasn't something I could keep sustainable. And so I really saw them as separate things. Like when comedy comes calling, and the Tonight Show and SNL start, like, okay, I'm gonna let maybe I'll have to let this advocacy work drop off a little bit.
mm,
um but the more I got involved with the Independent Living Center, Summit Independent Living Center here in Montana, um the more those Venn diagrams start moving closer together. And I was using a lot of the things that I learned and the confidence I had in stand up and performing in front of people, in the classroom working with students. So, and just in my own teaching style, and also some of the games. This is where improv starts to sneak in. We start doing some improv games in the classroom with students. In we have a program called Balls. It's building advocacy and learning leadership skills.
okay.
Yeah, it's really started out as an attempt for me never to be asked to teach again. Um, so I was like, they'll never go for this. They're never going to go for a program called Ball. But the director said, absolutely, let's do it. And so that was 13, 15 years ago. Um, so really going into classrooms with that mindset that life is inherently improv. So for people that aren't familiar with improv, it's a form of theater where you're not handed a script. You're given guidelines. So, how do these two people know each other, and where are they? So,
Mhm,
okay, they're lawyer client on the moon, and then you have to make something up
mhm,
in those guidelines. And it really does transfer to life, because how often in life are you handed a script at the beginning of the day? I said, here's exactly what you're supposed to say,
Mhm.
and here's exactly how people are going to respond to you. And as nice as that would be, like, that would be so nice if I knew going into things. But it's not. We're given a class schedule or we're giving a meeting agenda.
Mhm.
And our success or failure, individually and collectively, is how do we make up the dialogue in between those points? And that's an improv game.
Yeah.
And what better way to learn that skill than by having fun and having it not be about getting a job or surviving a board meeting. Um, so yeah, building that confidence um, in a way where you're having fun and also understanding that what do I do when I feel panicked and I don't know what to say?
Yeah.
What do I do when what I thought was going to happen doesn't happen and I got to go a whole different direction? Those are all things that happen in improv all the time. Um, so it also builds that relationship. I still get awkward. I still don't like talking, especially if I don't have a microphone in my hand. But I have a new relationship with that feeling,
Yeah.
and I know how to get beyond it, and actually, kind of mold it into something where I don't feel bad, and go forward that way. So that's really where it started, was in the high school classrooms, and then the base program um, is it's not an acronym as much as I love acronyms. It really started as a conversation amongst people, voc rehab counselors included, that we work with. And it was, on the drive to a conference or, getting dinner afterwards or on the car from schools, or at YLFs, and began this conversation about, hey, we have these great things that, like a youth leadership forum, or different states have a transition conference,
Mhm.
and students start to feel themselves like I did. They start to, like, hey, here's a community of people, and here's some ways that I can give back, which I think is a something maybe we'll talk about later. But they're fleeting.
Mhm.
They're 1 week during a summer, and only 25 students can attend.
Mm.
They're once a year, and it's over a weekend. So, and in a rural state like Montana, and anywhere really, like, what happens when you go home though?
Yeah.
And you want that feeling. Like, you can't, so and combined with some of the other programs we're doing, was also at this time we were working with we have a fledgling group of comedians in Missoula, um, where it was just me for like 10 years. So they were getting bigger, and they were, we're outgrowing coffee shops and, people's living rooms to meet. So we were also kind of, so anyway, we combined these couple things into the idea that we need a place. We need a place locally where people can go when they need.
Mhm.
So, and the reason it's called base is because we've all played a game of tag. It's pretty universal. And when you play tag, when you make up a game, the first thing you do is establish base. And whether it's the monkey bars or your couch, like, the understanding is, if my hand is on this spot,
Mhm.
no matter how stressful the game is, if my hand is here, you can't mess with me. I can take a breath, I can make a plan, I can just be.
Mm.
But the understanding is, I can't stay here. I have to go back and play the game.
That's true.
My ability to come back is infinite, but I can never stay here. And that's really the part that we liked from an independent living and a goal standpoint, is you can come here whenever you need, but you can't stay here. We're always going to push you back to the game. So wouldn't it be nice, to complete the analogy, if as an adult, as a young adult, or somebody of any age, if life is the game, wouldn't it be nice if you knew where to run and be
Mhm.
like, and put your hand and say, no, for an hour, for an afternoon, I'm a teacher, I'm a student, I'm me. And I don't have to, and I know this is a very loaded statement right now, I don't have to wear a mask.
Yeah.
I don't have to wear a mask here. And I think that's, Sure as I know, that's all the people that are tired or like throw a fit, an adult tantrum for wearing a physical mask this year, are all the people that haven't worn masks their whole lives.
Very true.
The rest of us are fine with wearing a physical mask because I wear 15 masks every day when I leave my house,
Mm.
depending on the audience that I'm in front of. You know, whether it's my family, whether it's my friend group, whether it's my job, so yeah, putting putting a physical mask on is nothing. But it is also nice to have a place where you can just um so where comedy and improv comes in is we're not just, you know, a place where people can come sit. We want to create interest, we want to create community around interest and not label.
Yeah.
So the you know, something that I know in independent living and I know voc rehab, you know, being in these circles of conversation, you know, and it's I don't know if it's always been this way, but since I in the early 2000s got involved, when we talk about community and people with disabilities, the focus is employment and housing. So we want people to live in the community. So you got to give them like a place to live and a job.
Hmm.
In Missoula, where I live, would be the case, or Atlanta, wherever you are. But we've really kind of, again, in these conversations, started to rethink community. Missoula itself is not a community. It is a geographical location on a map.
Mm.
Community is a group of as little as two people that care about you and care whether you show up. And if you don't, they're going to call you and that you share the same interests with. It's not a group that you know, I'm blind, you're blind, we're a community. That's not a community. You're two blind people. So, you know, how do we build community on interest instead of label was a big part of it. And that's where, you know, our first program at base at the community center was improv. So it's improv open to the entire Missoula community,
Hmm.
free of charge. And obviously, we are an independent living center. So our emphasis and our North Star is accessibility, is in
Yeah.
making sure that whoever you are, when you come through that door, you feel welcome and that you can participate in something. I think that was another big lesson that we learned from like accessible playgrounds that are popping up. You're seeing more like inclusive playgrounds around the
Hmm.
country. But Jenny Montgomery, one of the parents that got us started on the playground, you know, in the focus groups, what really came out is that not everything on the playground needs to be accessible to everybody, but everybody needs to be able to do something.
Mm.
So that keeps it away from being that program for those people.
Yeah.
If it's that program for those people, which is what I grew up with, it's isolating. You've
Yeah.
created a playground that's an institution. Whereas if you focus on the entire community and also the idea that everybody can do something, then
Hmm.
you know you can start building those relationships. So yeah, we've been, and I would say the other thing that really I think has been amazing, and why I bring up the group of comedians is because we didn't have like money. We're comedians in Montana. We don't have money to um, to rent space when we need rehearsals and
Hmm.
these things. So the deal that the from right when we opened in 2015, the deal that the center struck with the comedians was you can use this space in the evenings and the weekends and when we're not in here free of charge, but as a
Wow.
group you're responsible for 15 hours of volunteer time a week, which was way more valuable than any like $25 an hour whatever.
Yeah.
So it infused our programs not only with, you know, people from the community that didn't necessarily identify as disability, but it was also energy and creativity and and we ended up, you know, After volunteering for a year, some of the comedians even were like, oh yeah, I have, ADHD, or I've, struggled with dyslexia. So they ended up identifying. So from a
Yeah.
center perspective, we were like, wow, okay, like here's a community we never would have reached out to otherwise, but through improv and a wrestling group, we don't actually wrestle. We just talk smack like they do.
Yeah. Well,
But
it
yeah,
sounds like your journey has come in full circle, right? Because you mentioned in the beginning how when you attended that first conference, the thing that happened for you was the feeling of not belonging, and you have been intentional in being involved in helping create programs that foster community. Because ultimately for you, that was the thing that was missing when you were coming up. It was like the programs were there, but you didn't feel validated as a young person. So I just love the intentionality that you have put into fostering community and everything that you've been involved in since becoming an advocate.
yeah, that is. I hadn't connected those dots. Thank you. But yeah, no, that is, and it is something that we don't. I think like funding does this, and also our like just the way we nonprofits um, are set up is that we're all evidence based, right?
Mhm.
Everything has to be evidence based, and that's one thing we've struggled with funding, and we credit our center has been amazing with letting us run with these ideas. Um, is well, it can't be evidence based if no one's done it before. Um,
That's a good point.
and as a group of artists, like we can't help but be audience based. So we're not evidence based, we're audience based, and this is what the community is telling us
Yeah.
that they need, and we need to, how can we respond to that? Has been a cool thing. So to see some of that and get the ideas from the community in creative ways has been cool.
So just based off of your personal experience and the experiences that you have observed with the youth that you currently have worked with in the past and are currently are working with, what are some of the most common day-to-day challenges that youth with disabilities experience?
Okay. Uh, in okay. I think in the years that I've been doing this, I've boiled it down to two words that I could give a couple TED Talks about. Solicited or not, I end up giving them just unsolicited all the time. Uh, uh, Community and loneliness.
Mm,
Um, I think we need to. There's other things, but I think in work, listening to the students over the years, and thinking about my own experience, if we don't start as a community, whether it's you know you call yourself independent living or voc rehab, or if you say you work in disability, we need to start intentionally focusing on loneliness as a barrier, and community, like I talked about. And one story that really I think helped point this out to me, I was doing a comedy show for an independent living or no, it was it was an advocacy conference in Michigan, and I have a fantastic mentor of mine over the years, Jim Whalen. He was a center director, and a person that's been visually impaired since he was a kid. And it was one of these between meeting conversations, and he was talking to this other old guy. They're like 65, 70. And they that game where old guys really like to like crap on millennials. They were having a
yeah.
little bit of that. Yeah, and I did it too until I realized I was one by like, oh, never mind. But they were, all of these kids don't know how good they have it. Like they've never, lived in a world without the ADA. the Americans with Disabilities Act. And,
Mm.
before it was so rough, we didn't have the ramps and we didn't have this. And I really expected Jim to kind of just pile on, but he didn't. He stopped his friend he was talking to. And he said, "Yeah, I get that. But even back before we had these laws, I never had trouble getting somewhere that 10 of my friends wanted me to be."
Mm.
And that hit me hard, because it made me think about my experience and every youth I work with every day. And there's ramps in the majority of the buildings they need to go in. There's physical accessibility and elevators, and we even have braille menus and better access. I'm not going to say good access, better access to interpreters and things like this. But I don't know any of them that have 10 friends.
Mm.
And so, as many gains as we've made in legislation
Yeah.
and accessibility, I wonder if we have lost focus on that part of it. Because what good is a restaurant that's fully accessible, or a movie theater, if you don't have people that want you to be there?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's an issue we need to be better about. I also um, I think that a conversation that we've had a lot with students over I would say the last 10 years is, in your opinion, and these are most majority high school students, sometimes college. In your opinion, like right now, what is a bigger barrier potentially to a student having a visible disability that other people can see that you have? Like I have a short right arm with four fingers on one hand. I call it my hour hand because I also have the minute hand. Silly clock jokes, but um, I um, so I was making jokes and then I forgot what train of thought I was on. But it's okay. So is it easier to have a bigger barrier if you have a disability other people can see, or is it if you have a disability you deal with every day, but people can't see by looking at you? And where you want to get them as a facilitator is the idea that the impact of your disability depends on you as an individual and circumstance.
Mhm.
So yeah, if I'm have trouble reading and I'm climbing a set of stairs, my disability doesn't affect me at all. But if I'm taking a test and a pop quiz I wasn't ready for, that shoots up. My disability is all that matters right now.
Mhm.
You want to get them and have that conversation. But overwhelmingly, with the answers that we get back, it's harder to have a disability people can't see.
Mm.
And I've had students stand up in the middle of assemblies and say, "Yeah, I'm on the spectrum. I have autism, and it's hard because everybody knows not to make fun of your hand." And he sat down is with the punchline being, they don't know not to make fun of me.
Yeah.
And with everything in the media around mental health, every time there's a shooting, and the misconceptions and crappy puzzle piece campaigns that are out there about autism being an epidemic, that's really where the discrimination, the social discrimination, and pragmatics discrimination is happening, is not with the you know the wheelchair symbol on the parking sign.
Yeah.
It's with the people that we say are under this umbrella, but have we met that promise that we made in making them a part of the advocacy that we're striving for? So yeah, and so recognition, I think, of those struggles. I mean, I work at a place where a majority of the people have a physical disability, but in 15 years of going into classrooms, I'd say a majority of the people in special ed have disabilities I can't see.
Yeah.
So, where, you know, as programs and, folk rehab, independent living, how are we meeting that paradigm um, versus like when we got started? I know, folk rehab start was very much a focus on blind and low vision and physical disability and acquired disability. So I think pre-eds is a good start. I
Yeah.
think that, that's been a cool shift I've seen over the last, handful of years. But yeah.
So what are some tips or just maybe like 2 or 3 things that you will want the VR counselors listening to this podcast to know, or just to keep at the forefront as they're working with youth with disabilities?
Right. And this again, this is where I really credit the pre-eds for the informational interviews and the work experiences. So I think being a product, the old world, before pre-eds, I went through voc rehab. I'm a comedian, a professional comedian, in part because of voc rehab, because
Mm,
I have a VR counselor that after 2 years of helping me with my goal to go to the University of Montana, you know, uh, I was doing everything. I was kind of doing the bare minimums. But he also kept seeing my name in the paper of, you're having a show here, you're doing it. He's like, is this really where your heart is? Is this really like in college? And I was like, no. And he's like, we can change your goal.
yeah.
You can be a stand-up comic. And so yeah, he did. And they helped me with demo tapes because that's how old I am. I remember the old VHS. My first demo tape was a VHS toaster. Um, um, but it was like the old setting was that VR couldn't talk to me until I was the junior year, second semester, typically. And um and then I remember going through the assessments, and the emphasis was not, I was never encouraged to get a job um before voc rehab got involved. And it wasn't because I didn't need to get a job or my peers weren't. It was because I in order for other people, the adults in my life, they all said, in order for you to get the things we think you need, um, don't get a job. Don't prove that you can work. Because if you
Mm,
prove you work, you're not going to be eligible for these things.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I almost had to, say, oh no, I can't flip a burger. I can't do this. I can't. Um, but in working with young people, there's something gained there. Having that crappy job that you don't like the manager and doesn't like that gives you something that a lot of, and if you're in college and you haven't had those opportunities to fail like your other peers have and learn from it, you're starting at 19. um
Mm,
and Voc Rehab's trying to set you up with a job that's a career, but you haven't stumbled yet the way you can at Taco Bell.
yeah.
Now you're stumbling at an internship at a marketing place or a video game thing. So yeah, like I think, and the work experiences help with that, like getting that work ethic, building that in um, to students earlier and encouraging that as much as you can, I
Mm,
think is amazing. Second piece of advice is this is the like number one rule of improv is yes and. So rather than saying no, you say yes and something else, and you build on it. And this has done led to so many great things working with students with VR and outside of Oak Rehab. When we have the student come up and say, "I want to be a video game designer," because everyone wants to be a video game designer, or now it's everybody wants to be a YouTuber.
yes.
And then you can You can hear the adults in the room rolling their eyes. Um, instead of, no matter, okay, there's two pieces of advice wrapped up in one. Um, throw out the term level of function. Like, let's just retire that completely. I have yet to have somebody bring it up to one of our groups and have it be a valid term referring to people. I'm so sick of it. We're all very, because you go into classrooms and you'll have a teacher, some amazing teachers out there. I don't want to, but you'll have teachers that be like, well, yeah, I think leadership is great, but the students I work with just aren't at that level of function. And you're like, I'm sorry. Isn't being a student inherently mean that you have a lower level of function than the teacher? So instead of concentrating on their level of function, start thinking about how their level of function relates to your level of function. So if you raise your level of function a little higher, maybe you'll see theirs come up a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, you just had me like adjust my vision, like, whoa. But that's a very progressive and out of the box way to look at it, because basically you're saying, if you challenge yourself as the person who has that authority and you're navigating things differently, essentially you're modeling for your students to do the same thing. So if you think in a limited way, like, oh no, our cap is here, you're directly and indirectly communicating that and sending that message to those young people that there's like, your limitation is here. This is as far as you can go. Let's just stay here.
Right.
And that's it. So, well, I thank you. You've shared such great just
What?
information today that you have final words that you want to.
One real quick.
Yes.
So to like as an example of that,
Mm-hmm.
and this made me think when you talk. A colleague of mine, she now works with April, the Associated Programs for Rural Independent Living. We were in a classroom teaching together, and this is an example. I always like to give examples. We had a student who had a developmental disability, and for years had told us, "I want to be a race car driver. I want to be a race car driver." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." But it was the senior year, and we're like, "What do you want?" And he said, we're in his IEP, and he's like, "I want to be a race car driver."
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us knew, like, him getting a driver's license was going to be a struggle. So, race car driver, and thankfully the case manager was sitting behind, but she rolled her eyes. And my colleague Mary said, "Okay, what do you like about it? Is it this fast speed and everything?" And he said, "Nope." It's like, "Oh, is it the crowds? It's like, nope." And within 3 or 4 questions, we got to the idea that it wasn't any of that. It wasn't the driving the car. It was the paint on the car. It was the bright logos and the different colors. That's what he was so passionate about. So working with Voc Rehab, we were able to set him up with an internship at a body shop, and he ended up doing like 6 months employment, helping paint the cars. But we don't, and that story sticks out to me because we don't get there.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get there if Mary says no.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea, and when we talk with students that want to be YouTubers or anything, it's very often it's not that specific job that they want. It's that they don't have the language to say exactly what they want. So, as a Voc Rehab counselor, yeah, really like, what they're saying may not be what they're passionate about. They just don't know the words, or that what they're passionate about is a job. So
yeah, or they're associating it with something that's familiar to them. So there's something about what a YouTuber does. As you mentioned, like there was an aspect to the race car driving prospect, but it wasn't the only thing. So it was the car and the flash and all of that. But he was associating because all the cars that he saw on the racetrack looked like that.
Mhm.
versus the regular cars that you see on the street. So I could see somebody having that association there.
Yeah.
Um, wow. Look, first, I just want to say thank you for just being so transparent and sharing all of this wisdom. I really think for me, the thing that stuck out is about that community piece about making progress in one arena as far as like legislation and different policies is great, but really going back to that fundamental aspect of creating community and making sure that as we are advocating and directly or indirectly working with this youth with disabilities, we are also fostering that community, which I think that can resonate with anybody. When you have when you feel the sense of connectivity, it just makes you, like you said, you walk into a space and you feel like you belong, and it just adds to that advocacy and just that self-esteem as well. So thank you for that.
Hey.
Any final words that you have for our listeners today?
Um, I think oh, this is one I've been marinating on lately. Um, uh, be bold. So go boldly. Something that I got. You get involved with something and you drink the Kool-Aid, and then you get a little older and you start looking at the ingredients. You're like, that's a lot of sugar. maybe, maybe this Kool-Aid's good. It's just maybe I should rethink the Kool-Aid a little bit. That's where I'm at with certain things, and where I think a lot of people that I talk to, um, and that's to say, there's a slogan with around disability that you see a lot. It's like ADA, and I have T-shirts that say this on the back: to boldly go where everyone else has gone before. And and it rings true. It's a nice, if you're a Star Trek fan, it's a nice play on words. And it also is a great phrase for the physical access that we need to boldly go where everyone else has gone before.
Mhm.
But inherently, it's defeatist. If at my best, I'm striving to be something everyone else already is. If at my best, I'm only as good as you are, then you like you said with the level of function. Like if that's the message we're putting out, it doesn't encourage anybody to strive beyond where everybody else is.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the message that I think young people would like to hear more, is not to boldly go where everyone else has gone before, but to boldly go.
Period.
Yeah, hard stop. Go boldly. Because if you think that way, we can start creating spaces as people with disabilities that other people want to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not constantly just asking to be invited to the party everybody's already at. Um, I think to me, that's been a conversation that I've enjoyed being a part of lately.
Yeah. So again, I think that the theme today is like really that true inclusion, because again, I think sometimes we, especially with everything that's going on these days, it's like diversity,
Mm,
accessibility. But when there's a lack of true inclusion, all
mm,
of that like means nothing.
yeah.
And so, wow, thank you so much. That was such a great way to wrap up our talks today.
Hey.
I appreciate you taking this time to be with us today.
Absolutely.
You've shared just some great from your personal experience, your professional experience, and your passion behind advocating and advocacy work that you're doing with youth. Thank you for everything that you're doing within your community.
Hey.
And it's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for doing this podcast.
Of course.
No- yeah.